Jacksboro Highway Chapter One. Luke dragged the hind's carcass down the bracken-clad slope, the stems bending and cracking as he descended. He reached a flattish clearing situated within a cluster of oaks. He'd earmarked the spot earlier, before he'd settled down in his hide to wait. As he knelt down to start gutting her, a cloud slid across the sun, casting a shadow over the glade. Luke shuffled around on his knees to allow daylight to brighten his work. He looked up and saw a patch of grey sky through a gap between the boughs of two enormous oaks. The branches came so close they looked like arms, stretching out to touch their fingertips, connecting the two giants above as they were certainly connected below ground. But they didn't quite reach, and through the gap dribbled just enough daylight for Luke to work under. Darker clouds from the east were gathering. When he'd set off from the village, the sky had been clear and blue, with a handful of morning stars still winking. But the incoming autumn storm Luke had initially hoped would veer away and miss him had kept straight on, inexorably closing on him in the Woodborough Hills. Soon enough he'd feel the drop in pressure, and before he got back to Flockton with his prize, he'd be soaked. Wolf looked out from his upper floor window. To the west, the Woodborough Hills rose up from the valley bathed in sunshine. But he felt, without having to check the barometer, that it wouldn't last all day. A storm was coming. Damn. If it lasted into the evening and night, that would be bad for business. He reached the bed in 2 paces and threw back the duvet. The redhead started, then woke quickly, alarmed, curling up like a fetus to cover her nudity. "Up," Wolf ordered. "Get your clothes on." He snatched up his own clothes from the bedside chair, starting to and then slipped them smoothly over his long, muscled frame. The girl, Trixie, looked up, caught her breath and sat up, leaning back on her arms with her knees apart. She raised her eyes hopefully. God, he was a good-looking devil. Long blonde hair and beard. Blonde hair all over his long, lean body too. Wolf looked as Viking as if he'd just climbed out of the longboat. Ice blue eyes that pierced right through you, if you dared look at them. His eyes were as cold as his heartless soul. She suppressed yet another shudder of desire. Wolf lifted his knife belt from where it hung on the chair's back. He swung it round his waist, clipped it tight. "Hurry up, or you'll dress out there." He nodded at the door. It opened onto Wolf's indoor balcony from where he could look out onto the casino floor, and beyond that the lure pole set into its small circular podium. Behind it and to the sides were the doors and curtains to other rooms and attractions. Trixie slid off the bed and found her clothes littered around the room where she'd thrown them last night, performing a private show for him. Not many people would be out there to see her this early, just a few cleaners maybe, but still, she wasn't going to give them a free look. Punters had to pay, and so could they. Wolf pulled a leather thong from under his pillow. Dangling from the end were thick keys that wouldn't have looked out of place on a Dark Ages jailer's belt. A few smaller keys jangled up against them. He snatched up a blood-red wristband, slid it up his arm to emphasize one bicep. He strode to the door, unlocked it. The heavy, solid steel drew complaining groans from its hinges as it swung open. Wolf snatched up the girl's jacket and handbag, placing them on the desk from where he viewed his kingdom. Trixie hopped across the room, holding her jeans up with one hand and her heels in the other. Wolf pulled the door shut. Echoes rang across the high-roofed space. Faces looked up at the sound, then quickly lowered again at the sight of Wolf. He locked the door, lifted the thong over his head, then swaggered down the stairs to his casino's main floor. Luke pushed the cart down Flockton's main street. The hind's head and front legs lolled up and down, dangling over the edge. The rain had paused, but the cart's wheels splashed through the puddles it had left. Copper and chestnut-coloured leaves skittered across the road. He dropped in at home for a kiss and a cuppa with Hera, changed out of his wet camo gear, put on dry clothes, then set off for the cold store. Most faces turned away as he trundled past them. One or two said quick hellos, mostly his trade customers, but moved hurriedly on down the street, not offering anything friendlier. He opened the butchery and cold store complex door and dragged the carcass inside. The cold store itself stood in the corner of the larger room, surrounded by sturdy wooden benches and butcher's blocks. Hooks and chains hung from the rafters. Luke had to duck underneath them. The smell of ammonia stung his nostrils. He frowned when he reached the bench he shared with several other butchers. Blood and meat debris littered the block. Black, white and tan hair decorated the mess. He grunted, poured a bucket of brine from the barrel and began scrubbing. When Wolf reached the bottom of the stairs, he turned around and walked through a door into a long corridor with an earthen floor. Above him were his private rooms he'd just locked behind him. Breathing in the fusty air, he walked past side rooms containing dry goods, maintenance and cleaning supplies, all boring necessities he delegated to others. The end of the corridor. Through one last door, he entered a dark cubicle. He snapped on the dim light bulb. A trapdoor lay in the centre, surrounded on three sides by a waist-high barrier. Underneath the trap was a short wooden set of steps, which creaked under his weight. At the bottom of the steps, a sloping sand floor led to a row of cells. An anxious, pale face stared at him through the bars.